Hi there. Here are a couple of average value practice problems. If you are doing this in preparation for your test, I might recommend pausing the video after I put the problem onto the screen and then trying it on your own, then restarting the video. Either fast forwarding to the answer so that you can see what the answer was and check your answer, or watching the video if you do in fact get stuck or get the wrong answer. So the first problem we're going to look at is going to ask you to find the average value of f of x, and our f of x is going to be x squared minus 5x plus 6 on the interval -1 to 4. So again, find the average value of f of x on -1 to 4. Okay, so the average value, we're looking at 1 over my b minus my a times the integral from a to b of whatever they ask me for the average of. In this case, they want me to find the average of f, so I'm going to go ahead and put f into this integral. If this was a calculator question, I now would plug that into my calculator and let my calculator do the work for me. In instances where it was a non-calculator, though, I would want to go ahead and practice my computation. So 4 minus -1 is 5. The antiderivative of x squared is 1/3 x cubed. Antiderivative of 5x is 5x squared over 2. And the antiderivative of 6 is 6x. Okay. Now we're going to go ahead and plug in our upper minus plug in our lower. So when I plug in 4, I get 64/3 minus 16 divided by 2 is 8, and 8 times 5 is 40. 6 times 4 is 24. Minus, plugging in my lower, we get -1/3 minus 5/2 minus 6. Okay, the route you take at this point for your simplification could potentially be unique to how you see the problem. For me, once I see that I have all of these denominators, and they're all kind of different denominators. I have a denominator of 3, denominator of 2, and of course then a denominator of 1, if you want to think of it that way. For me, I usually like to distribute this negative in and see if I can combine like denominators first before I start to mess with finding a common denominator. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to distribute that negative in. So we would still have 64/3 minus 40 plus 24. But then I'm going to have minus a -1/3, which is plus 1/3, minus a -5/2, which is plus 5/2, and minus a -6, which is plus 6. Okay, at that point, that'll allow me to go ahead and do a little bit of cleanup pre-common denominator. I know that 24 plus 6 is 30, minus 40 is -10. I know that 64/3 plus 1/3 is 65/3, and then 5/2 is by itself here. Okay, and so it's at that point that I'm going to go ahead and find my common denominator. So common denominator is going to be 6, so we have -60 over 6. Multiplying top and bottom by 2, you have 130 over 6. Multiplying top and bottom by 3, you have 15 over 6. And actually it just occurred to me this would be another option if you didn't want to find the common denominator quite yet. One thing you could do that would make your numerators a little smaller would be to distribute this 1/5 in and then find the common denominator, because if we distributed the 1/5 we'd have -2 plus 13 over 3 plus 1/2, and those would be smaller numbers to have to find common denominators with, so that would be an option. But I'll go ahead and proceed as I've started. Okay, and so then we have our -60 plus 130, which is going to be 70, plus 15, which is 85 over 6, and 5 goes into 18 17 times, and so we have 17/6 as our answer there. Okay, let's go ahead and do another. We'll make it a trig one. I'm going to try to intersperse some trig ideas and with just kind of normal power rule. So find the average value of f of x equals cosine x on the interval 0 to pi over 2. Okay, so average, we have 1 over b minus a times the integral from a to b of whatever they asked me for the average of. And in this case, your directions again were find the average value of f. So we'll go ahead and plug in cosine x. Okay, 1 over, this is pi over 2, x minus 0 doesn't do anything. Dividing by a fraction like this is the same thing as multiplying by its reciprocal. So go ahead and do 2 over pi. And then the antiderivative of cosine is sine. Okay, and then we have, plug in the upper. Sine of pi over 2, when you think of your unit circle, this is pi over 2, which is at the point 0, 1, cosine sine. So sine of pi over 2 is 1. Minus my sine of 0. 0 on the unit circle is out here, which is at 1, 0, cosine sine. And so my sine of 0 is 0. So 2 over pi times 1 is 2 over pi. Okay. And we'll go ahead and do one more here. Find the average value of f. F of x is going to be x squared times the quantity of x minus 2 on the interval -1 to 1. Okay, so average 1 over b minus a times the integral from a to b of whatever they asked me for the average of. In this case, it's going to be the average of f. Now, I already see that when I put this in to my integral, actually I'll go ahead and write it, that when I put this into my integral, to utilize power rule, in order to take the antiderivative, I know I'm going to have to distribute this, and so I'm going to go ahead and take that step. 1 minus -1 is 2. And distributing that x squared in, we have x cubed minus 2x squared dx. Okay, so now the antiderivative, 1/2. Antiderivative of x cubed is x to the 4th over 4. And 2x cubed over 3, the antiderivative of 2x squared. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and plug in our upper. We have 1/4 minus 2/3 minus, plug in our lower, which is also going to be 1/4, but now plus 2/3. Okay. And so I could clean up within the parentheses, but again, I'm noticing that I have like a 4th and a 4th between the two parentheses and a 3rd and a 3rd between the two parentheses. So I'm going to go ahead and choose this time to distribute the negative in, see if I can clean it up pre-common denominator. So we have 1/4 minus 2/3, distributing the negative. This is minus 1/4 minus 2/3. And what do you know? When we take that step, I notice that my 1/4 simplify. 1/4 minus 1/4 is 0. So I'm left with 1/2 times -2/3 minus 2/3 is -4/3. And the 2 and the 4 would cross simplify, leaving me with -2/3.